General Hospital spoilers for reveal that Brook Lynn Courtroom has always been a woman who walks the line between fierce loyalty and explosive defiance, but now, as tensions reach a boiling point in Port Charles, she is no longer content to play the role of the sidelined stepmother or the passive bystander. In a shocking turn of events, Brook Lynn has officially retained legal counsel, signaling her readiness to engage in a full-blown legal battle, one that could change not just her life, but the future of Giovanni Gio Palmieri forever. While most people initially believed her interest in the birth certificate of Rocco was connected solely to Lulu's past, a far more calculated and emotionally driven motive is emerging. Brook Lynn isn't merely digging into Lulu's secrets, she's preparing to assert her own long-buried claim. For years, Brook Lynn has played second to Lulu in Joe's life. Even after dedicating herself to his well-being, stepping into the maternal void when Lulu was incapacitated, and forming an unshakable bond with the boy, she was still pushed to the background as Lulu returned to reclaim her son. That return brought with it not only guilt and confusion but also an erasure of Brook Lynn's role and significance. Now, as the dust settles from that emotional storm, Brook Lynn is no longer willing to stand back and accept the status quo. Her move to hire a lawyer represents more than a legal maneuver, it's an act of defiance, of reclamation, and of war. She is preparing to demand her rightful place in Joe's life and to challenge the long-standing assumption that biology alone determines motherhood. This isn't just about legal documents or courtrooms. It's about rewriting a narrative that has excluded her for too long. Brook Lynn's fight will undoubtedly center on the emotional, psychological, and physical support she's provided to Gio. She may argue that while Lulu was absent, by no fault of her own, Brook Lynn was the one who attended school meetings, offered late-night comfort during nightmares, and showed up every single day when no one else could. And now, as Lulu resumes her place in Joe's life, Brook Lynn is faced with the painful realization that all of her love, sacrifice, and consistency may mean nothing if the law and the town continue to ignore her role. But there's more to this than just a personal vendetta against Lulu. The stakes are growing by the day, especially now that whispers of Joe's true parentage are beginning to surface. Could there be a deeper reason behind Brook Lynn's sudden aggressive legal strategy? Could she be in possession of information, perhaps even proof, that changes the entire foundation of who Gio is, and what her role in his life was always meant to be? The possibilities are staggering. And if Brook Lynn reveals something explosive in court, it could dismantle the fragile trust that's just barely been rebuilt between her, Lulu, and Dante. Brook Lynn's decision to go down this path isn't without consequence. Dante is already torn between his loyalty to Lulu and his growing understanding of Brook Lynn's pain. Their relationship, once romantic and now bound by their co-parenting roles and mutual respect, could fracture beyond repair. Meanwhile, Lulu, who's only just begun to reclaim her life after years in a coma, may feel blindsided, betrayed, and attacked, especially if the custody hearing becomes a character assassination. The community will be divided. Friends will take sides. The Courtooms may back Brook Lynn, while the Spencers will likely rally around Lulu. And Gio, caught in the middle, could suffer the deepest wound of all. Forced to watch the two women he trusts most tear each other apart in a battle for his heart and identity. This battle is far from over, it's just beginning. Brook Lynn's choice to lawyer up is the first volley in what promises to be an emotionally devastating war, not only for custody, but for legitimacy, love, and legacy. Her actions are not those of a woman looking for revenge, but of one seeking recognition and justice in a system that has never acknowledged the full truth. Port Charles is bracing for the storm that is sure to come, and once the courtroom doors open, no one, especially Lulu, will be able to ignore the fury, grief, and purpose burning behind Brook Lynn's eyes. She's not backing down. She's stepping up. And what comes next could shake the very foundation of what it means to be family. Certainly. Here's an extended, continuous English narrative based on your plot direction, written in a fluid and immersive prose style, reaching approximately 10,000 characters. Brook Lynn had spent years burying the ache, telling herself that silence was safety and distance was strength. But deep in the quiet corners of her heart, the truth never slept. It pulsed like a heartbeat, insistent and unrelenting, a reminder that she had given something away that could never truly be replaced, her son. And now, as the truth finally clawed its way to the surface, there was no more pretending. Gio wasn't just some boy caught in the chaos of Port Charles. He was her child. Her blood. Her legacy. And no matter how much time had passed, no matter how many people had tried to rewrite the narrative, Brook Lynn was ready to reclaim what had always been hers. The revelation of Joe's true parentage had detonated like a bomb across the tightly wound fabric of the Falconeri, Spencer, and Courtroom families. For years, everyone believed Dante and Lulu were the unquestioned parents of Gio, a belief held in place by assumptions, half-truths, and perhaps even carefully constructed lies. But the moment Brook Lynn held that certified copy of Joe's amended birth certificate, when she saw her name etched into the space once believed to belong to another, something broke open inside her. And something else hardened. This wasn't just about a document or a name. It was about justice, identity, and a mother's claim to the child she had lost to time, to guilt, and to silence. The decision to hire a lawyer hadn't been spontaneous. It had come after long nights staring at old photographs. After replaying every conversation where she'd bitten her tongue while others dictated the story of her own son's life. She wasn't just going to be a footnote in Joe's history. She was going to write the next chapter. And to do that, she needed legal standing. She needed recognition. She needed to show the world, and Gio, that she had never stopped loving him. Even when it seemed she had let him go. But Lulu, ever the fierce protector, was not about to relinquish her claim without a fight. The news hit her like a betrayal wrapped in confusion. Lulu had raised Gio, taught him to read, sat beside him through every fever and heartbreak. She had been there when he took his first steps, when he said his first words. And through every scraped knee and tearful night. The idea that Brook Lynn could swoop in now, wielding legal documents like weapons and memories like grenades, was unbearable. To Lulu, this wasn't justice, it was an ambush. And so the lines were drawn. Quietly at first, then louder, with each passing day. Brook Lynn began assembling her case, pulling records, compiling timelines. And gathering witnesses who could attest to the deception that had stolen her child away from her. The Courtooms, long used to scandal and legal maneuvering, backed her with the weight of their resources and name. Tracy, sharp as ever, offered strategy. Ned, conflicted but loyal, reminded her to lead with heart, not vengeance. Even Olivia, torn between her loyalty to Dante and her empathy for Brook Lynn, offered cautious support. Dante stood in the eye of the storm. Caught between the two women who had shaped his life and the boy who had unknowingly become the center of a war. Gio himself was unraveling. The revelation of Brook Lynn's maternity wasn't just a twist of biology, it was a rupture in the foundation of everything he thought he knew. His world, once defined by the clear lines of family, now swirled with ambiguity and betrayal. Who was he, really? The son of the mother who raised him, or the one who gave birth to him and then disappeared? Brook Lynn saw his confusion and it pierced her deeper than any courtroom insult ever could. She wanted to reach him, to explain. To show him the pieces of herself that lived inside him, the way his smile crinkled like hers, the way his laugh sometimes turned into a song, the way his rage burned hot and fast, just like hers. But he wasn't ready. And she couldn't force him. So she focused on what she could control, the law, the truth, and her own unrelenting determination. Port Charles, ever hungry for scandal, watched the case unfold with breathless fascination. The press speculated. Friends picked sides. Strangers whispered. Some saw Brook Lynn as the villain. A woman weaponizing biology to tear a child from the only mother he had ever known. Others saw her as a wounded mother reclaiming her stolen child, a victim finally rising. The truth, as always, lived somewhere in between. The first court appearance was a spectacle of suppressed emotions and barely controlled fury. Lulu sat rigid, her lawyer painting a picture of stability, of continuity. Of a bond that could not and should not be severed. Brook Lynn's counsel responded with facts, timelines, and questions that cut to the heart of the matter. Who decides what makes a mother? Biology? Bond? Blood? Memory? And does the truth lose its power if it arrives too late? Gio, brought in for a private evaluation, was overwhelmed. Therapists, social workers, court-appointed guardians, all tried to assess what was best for him, but Gio had no answer. He loved Lulu. But the echo of Brook Lynn's voice in his mind, the strange sense of connection he felt in her presence, wouldn't leave him alone. He was being asked to choose between past and present, and he didn't know how. Brook Lynn knew the case wouldn't be won in a single hearing. This was a marathon, not a sprint. And she braced herself for the long haul. But privately, she wept. Every night. She replayed the moments she missed, his first birthday, his first day of school, his first heartbreak, and she swore to herself that no matter the outcome, she would never again be absent from his life. Meanwhile, Lulu grew more desperate. The fear of losing Gio haunted her every moment. She began scrutinizing every move Brook Lynn made, looking for inconsistencies, for weaknesses. The mutual respect that once tethered them had frayed into suspicion. They weren't just co-parents anymore. They were combatants in a war fueled by love and defined by pain. Then came the bombshell. A sealed letter from the past, found in a storage unit once belonging to Britt, hinted that the original switch of custody might not have been as clean or as legal as everyone believed. There were mentions of forged signatures, of pressures from unknown forces, of secrets that could invalidate the entire adoption process. Brook Lynn's lawyers pounced. If the letter could be authenticated, it could be the silver bullet they needed. Lulu, blindsided, lashed out. She accused Brook Lynn of manufacturing evidence. The court paused proceedings to investigate. Meanwhile, Gio withdrew further, struggling to reconcile the image of the two women now threatening to destroy each other in his name. And still, Brook Lynn remained resolute. She wasn't doing this to punish Lulu or to erase her place in Joe's life. She was doing this to be seen, to be acknowledged, to have her truth spoken aloud and written into the legal record. She didn't want to erase the past, she just wanted to be part of the future. As the courtroom drama deepened, so too did the emotional cost. Gio began acting out at school. Dante found himself resenting both women for dragging their son through this ordeal. Olivia begged them to settle privately. Ned offered to mediate. But neither Brook Lynn nor Lulu would back down. Because at the heart of it all was a boy who deserved to know the full truth of his origin, not just one version. A boy who deserved the love of both his mothers, not a war over who loved him more. And so Brook Lynn pressed on, not because it was easy, but because it was right. Whatever the court decided, one truth had already been written in fire. Brook Lynn Courtroom would never again be silent. She was Joe's mother. And she would fight for him, no matter how long it took. Of all the battles Brook Lynn Courtroom had faced in her life, nothing compared to the war she now found herself in, the war for her son, for her truth, and for her right to reclaim everything that had been stolen from her. The revelation that Gio Palmieri was her biological child had ignited something deep and relentless inside her, something that had long simmered beneath layers of performance, compliance, and suppression. And now, that something had fully erupted. No longer willing to be erased or manipulated. Brook Lynn was prepared to tear apart every lie Lulu Spencer had wrapped around Joe's existence like a veil, and she was willing to go as far as it would take to make sure the world saw the truth. The courtroom drama wasn't just about custody anymore, it had become a high-stakes reckoning, the slow detonation of secrets Lulu had kept for years. Each one a betrayal disguised as maternal protection. Brook Lynn had been systematically removed from her son's life. Erased by a narrative Lulu carefully constructed to present herself as the sole source of love and stability in Joe's world. But that was over. And Brook Lynn was determined that her voice would no longer be the one drowned out by guilt, manipulation, and polite deference. The first piece of evidence she presented was a time-stamped guardianship contract, signed by Lulu and notarized the week Gio was born. It clearly outlined that Brook Lynn had not surrendered her child permanently, but had entrusted him temporarily to Lulu due to complications from postpartum trauma and an unstable living arrangement. But instead of honoring that agreement, Lulu had vanished with the child, allowing Dante and the entire Falconeri Spencer family to believe that Gio had no ties to Brook Lynn at all. That was the first betrayal. The second was even more chilling. Brook Lynn had unearthed medical documentation proving that Lulu had tampered with Joe's health records at General Hospital. Genetic data had been altered. Her name had been removed as the biological mother and replaced with a fabricated entry under Lulu's own name. An orderly. Since retired and now suffering from early-stage dementia, had been the one Lulu enlisted to make the change quietly in exchange for a hefty financial bribe. Brook Lynn had discovered it not in the hospital's official archives, but in a buried file folder inside Monica Quartermain's estate, one Monica had kept sealed after noticing irregularities during a paternity consult years ago but never acted upon for fear of damaging family peace. Now, Brook Lynn stood before the court with both pieces of evidence in hand. And the impact was immediate and seismic. Lulu, caught entirely off guard, denied the accusations at first. But as the documents were authenticated and the witnesses confirmed their contents, the courtroom turned against her. Dante was devastated. His trust had been shattered not only in Lulu but in the version of their family he had believed was founded on mutual love and truth. What he saw now was the deliberate orchestration of a lie. A lie so complete that it had shaped Joe's identity and stripped Brook Lynn of her rights, dignity, and maternal bond. The backlash in Port Charles was swift. Lulu's closest allies, Laura, Olivia, Maxie, struggled to reconcile the compassionate woman they knew with the calculating manipulator now exposed. Friends turned cautious. Gossip spread. Public sympathy leaned heavily toward Brook Lynn, especially as she refused to lash out or gloat. She maintained a steady composure, focusing only on Gio and what was best for him. That strength won her more support than any emotional outburst ever could. Yet, the damage to Gio was the hardest to witness. The boy was old enough to process betrayal even if he couldn't articulate its complexity. His once effortless bond with Lulu had fractured, replaced by suspicion, confusion, and a desperate need for clarity. With Brook Lynn, he was quiet at first, hesitant. But then came the questions. Where had she been? Why had no one told him? Was she really his mother? Brook Lynn answered with honesty and patience, never blaming Lulu in front of him, never speaking out of anger. She wanted Gio to know her story, not just as his mother, but as a woman who had fought for him even when the world pretended she didn't exist. But Brook Lynn's battle wasn't over. Lulu, though cornered, wasn't ready to relinquish control. She launched a countersuit, citing emotional instability, prior substance use, and a reckless musical career as reasons why Brook Lynn was unfit. She pulled Dante into the fray, twisting his lingering resentment into reluctant testimony. She recruited legal muscle from outside Port Charles, determined to retain Gio through any loophole possible. Brook Lynn responded not with anger, but with action. She retained one of the most formidable custody attorneys in New York State. A woman known for taking down entire family dynasties when a child's well-being was on the line. She also brought in experts, therapists, educators, and child psychologists, who had worked with Gio and vouched for the value of his renewed relationship with Brook Lynn. She opened her life to scrutiny, laid bare her finances, her home, her schedule. She even offered joint custody as a middle ground, hoping to minimize the trauma for Gio. But Lulu refused. To her, this wasn't about what was best for Gio. It was about control. About image. About never admitting she had built her life on someone else's motherhood. The town was divided, but the tide was shifting. In court, the judge questioned Lulu's refusal to compromise. Outside court, the press caught wind of the story and began to investigate deeper. Brook Lynn's restraint became a quiet rallying cry, especially among those who had once dismissed her as impulsive or entitled. People began to see the strength in her pain, the courage in her endurance. And Gio, slowly, steadily, started to open up. He drew pictures of the two of them. He began to call her Mom in whispered tones. He asked if she remembered his favorite cereal. She did. Then came the final blow. Brook Lynn revealed a third secret. One she had kept only as a last resort. It was a recorded voicemail from Lulu to Olivia, sent months after Joe's birth, in which Lulu admitted she was afraid that giving Gio back would make her invisible again. That she needed to be someone's everything, and that Brook Lynn would forget about him anyway. It was painful, damning, human, and utterly irredeemable in the eyes of the court. The judge ordered an immediate revision of custody. Brook Lynn was awarded primary physical custody, with supervised visitation for Lulu. The courtroom was silent. Lulu cried. Brook Lynn didn't. She simply reached for Joe's hand and walked him out of the courthouse, into a life that, finally, belonged to both of them. But there were scars. This victory wasn't bloodless. Brook Lynn had lost time she could never recover, and Gio had lost innocence he could never reclaim. Yet from those wounds, they built something honest. A new rhythm. A new family. She didn't try to replace the past. She simply began again. And as the dust settled in Port Charles, one truth became undeniable. Brook Lynn Quartermain had reclaimed her voice, her son, and her worth. And no matter what battles lay ahead, she would never again be silent. Gio and Rocco now found themselves standing at a crossroads that neither of them had anticipated, their young lives thrust into the center of a storm fueled by adult betrayals, long-buried secrets, and emotionally loaded truths. What had once seemed like a straightforward childhood, built upon the steady foundation of family names and trusted faces, was now unraveling into a tangled mess of conflicting loyalties and painful revelations. This wasn't just about choosing where to live or who to trust, it was about discovering who they truly were and what kind of future they could claim for themselves amid the wreckage. Gio had spent years believing he was the adopted child of Dante and Lulu, grateful, if sometimes confused, by the strange undercurrents between the adults around him. He had tried to be the good son, the understanding nephew, the well-behaved grandson, never knowing that the woman who had quietly lingered in the periphery of his life was, in fact, his biological mother. Brook Lynn's revelation had shattered the illusion, not because it was cruel, but because it was true. It forced Gio to reevaluate every memory, every lullaby, every bedtime story that had shaped his identity. And for Rocco, the foundation of his world was shaking as well. He had always believed he was the only child of Dante and Lulu, secure in his place, confident in his history. But then came the whispers, the inconsistencies, the rumors about altered birth certificates, and then the final, devastating realization. Even his lineage might not be what it seemed. The woman who raised him, the woman he trusted most, might have hidden truths from him that changed the core of his identity. The revelation that Britt Westbourne might be his biological mother had left him spiraling, uncertain of who he truly belonged to and whether everything he knew about himself had been a lie. Now, both Gio and Rocco were being asked, directly or indirectly, to choose. Not between right and wrong, but between two realities. Should they cling to the comfort of the life they had always known? Or step into the raw, uncertain world of truth, no matter how painful it might be? Should Gio embrace Brook Lynn as his mother and rebuild a relationship from the ground up? Or remain loyal to Lulu despite her betrayal? Should Rocco open his heart to the possibility that Britt, long presumed a ghost of a past scandal, might have truly been the woman who gave him life? This was more than a familial shakeup, it was a psychological reckoning, and both boys were living through it in real time. Gio, more introspective and artistically inclined, had begun drawing haunting sketches of two homes, two mothers, two futures. Rocco, impulsive and proud, had taken to silence, his anger simmering beneath the surface, erupting in outbursts that even Dante struggled to soothe. The adults around them fought their own wars, but the boys bore the collateral damage. And yet, despite the heartbreak, this moment was also a turning point. Gio and Rocco were no longer passive observers in their own stories. They were starting to ask hard questions, make conscious decisions, and demand space to feel what they needed to feel. Their bond, once shaped by shared experience and sibling rivalry, had deepened into something more profound, mutual understanding. They weren't just cousins anymore. They were survivors of the same emotional battlefield. One evening, as the sun dipped below the Port Charles skyline, the two boys stood side by side at the Metro Court terrace, looking out at the city that had given them both so much joy and so much pain. They didn't speak, but they didn't have to. In that silence was a pact. No matter what names were on their birth certificates, no matter which parent had lied or withheld, they would find their truth together. Not because the adults said so, but because they needed it to survive. And as the adults prepared for more legal battles, custody hearings, and media scandals, Gio and Rocco were already forging something stronger than any courtroom ruling: autonomy. The choice before them wasn't just about who to live with or who to love. It was about who they were becoming. And that journey, as painful and confusing as it was, marked the beginning of their own identities, forged not from secrets, but from the decision to face the truth head-on. In the days to come, there would be more drama, more revelations, more heartbreak. But Gio and Rocco had taken the first step in reclaiming their stories. And in a town like Port Charles, where legacies often dictate destiny, that choice was nothing short of revolutionary.